In my head, you were a part of the um, American fiction panel conversation, but I think what it was is that I listened to a panel you were on, pulled a couple of guys from that panel for my panel, but I didn't actually have the conversation with you. Is that what happened?
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm and I do remember at one point you were we were in some conversation about you reaching out to Mtume Gant. Did that happen? Was he part of that?
I think so. I think that's what
Because he's the one
happened.
that he's the one that messed me up with that movie. So he had to
What do you
correct me because
what do
I
you mean
raved
messed
about
you
the
up with that
film
movie?
initially. Like I raved about it because to contradict my own approach to these things, I got caught up in the fact that I saw myself in the lead character.
Is that
So I
so
missed
terrible?
it can be if you miss the underlying politics. So because I got wrapped up in this light-skinned, balding, bearded man disappointed with his career,
Well, as someone who isn't a
struggling with
light-skinned
his
balding,
waistline, I
well, as someone
said,
who is, as the someone who is not a light-skinned, balding, bearded man who may or may not be struggling with their waistline, I also saw myself in that movie, and I thought it
no,
was very
yeah.
good, and not in just like a representational politics, blah blah blah. I'm rooting for everybody black sort of way, but I think it's okay to like something because it is entertainment and narratively cohesive and an accurate representation of a slice of a demographic that isn't often depicted in any but a really superficial way. I thought it was self-aware and self-effacing in the right moments. Like there's this early moment where the what's the actor's name? The protagonist, the
Jeffrey
the light,
Wright.
the
Yeah.
Jeffrey Wright character goes to hail a cab and he thinks the cab has left him because he's black and he goes to stomp his foot and be like, "Ain't it always this way?" And then the cab fully like either pulls over for him or had pulled over, was out of commit. It was something that he was very quickly invalidated from thinking it was a race issue. Like it wasn't like where you thought that this genre of movie was gonna zig. It zagged. Like there's another moment where they're on the beach about to scatter the siblings' ashes, and there's like it's very solemn, and the white neighbor comes over, and you're like, oh no, this is about to be a racism. This person's about to tell them to get off the beach or something, and it's fully their beach, and it's like a neighbor that they've known for years, and they have like a casual interpersonal interaction instead of like this hostile racial interaction that we are sort of anticipating as an audience. I mean, the movie like understands, confronts, and subverts expectations for what the typical melodrama is, where they treat affluent black people as having the same concerns as working class blacks vis-a-vis the police and the state and violence, and instead kind of brushes us to the side and says, no, this is just going to be a story about affluent people who happen to be black, and their blackness is relevant in some of these ways, but not in these sort of basic expected ways. And I thought it did a really good job. Is that so wrong? Is that a crime?
It's no, it's not. So essentially, my argument is, and I've created this whole approach as a salute to an old coworker of mine named Vernon, and so I call it the Vernon philosophy of black media avoidance. And the long story short of it is that when we like media, commercial media in particular, commercial media produced in this particular political context, we should be more critical of it, because all that is usually a sign of is that those who have crafted that particular product have found all the buttons to push to make an audience want to consume it. And then what we end up missing in this particular film that Mtume had to help me catch to see are the underlying class politics, and it's an apologia in many ways for the black bourgeoisie, with the idea that the black community, regardless of the class level or situation, has, as you said, a lot more in common with one another than is often or not often enough considered. But in this case, when we do consider the black bourgeoisie, we're supposed to feel they're doing the best they can in this society. So if they make certain political choices or make certain cultural productive choices, we're supposed to just accept it with uncritically, because to your point, they do a lot of this well. They present a lot of this well, and in a way that does subvert expectation and does and is in particularly well acted. I thought the story, I mean, I liked a lot of it, but missed that very, I think, powerful underlying apologetic or for the black bourgeoisie.
I'd be curious. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's it. So I just think that's why it's important to just be, especially when we like something, to be critical of it. That's really all.
I'd be curious what you would make of the episode that we actually did, because I had Mtume on because I liked some of his takes, but I also felt like that argument that the movie was doing apologia. I think I mean it's been a while. I don't remember what was in the book and what was in the movie, but I do remember. Yeah, there were some deeper criticisms, harsher criticisms in the book that did not make it into the movie. Fair enough. But I also thought that that Mtume didn't acknowledge some of the criticisms of the black bourgeoisie that did make it into the movie. I want to say there was a scene where Jeffrey Wright's character tries to give the housekeeper an apron as like a parting gift. And she's like, why would I want the apron? Like, why would I want my work clothes? Like, you think this is sentimental for me? I'm like leaving servitude, loser. And I remember like the book makes her homophobic and the movie kind of sidesteps that, but that's a separate thing from like sort of the class critique. And it's a fair critique to be like, the movie wasn't brave enough to just make this person anything other than a sort of noble savage. But that's neither here nor there. I thought everyone's just allergic. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I never read the book, so I can't, my criticism.
Dr. Ball. If anything, I have it here. If anything, the book, makes some of that lane of criticism of the movie as being sort of less brave, more obvious, right? Because you can see what it looked like when the book did it. That being said, I also thought that the panel would refuse to accept that some of these edits were just because of the nature of a book versus a movie, and you just could not include everything. Like, it would have been a 4-hour movie. And
right. But again,
you got to make some choices.
Right, and that's sort of always the point, and that the choices that get made are often meticulously selected to produce a certain outcome for the audience.
And I would agree. And I would agree if every choice was let me cut out everything that makes these characters difficult or erases the class critique. But that wasn't what it was. It was like there's 10 things, 5 of them are critical class critique, and 5 of them are just filler. And we took 2.5 from here and 2.5 from there and put them into the movie. But there was a cherry picking of the things that were omitted that happened to relate to class, as though to read into it that Cord Jefferson was purposefully excluding the class analysis, when you could find 15 other things in the book that didn't make it in, that had nothing to do with class, and it seemed to be obvious that some of it was just about economy, especially given the choice to include so many aspects of the class critique. And like they were mad that in the book the sister who dies was working at an abortion clinic, and they erased that plot line for the movie. And in the book, which was written 20 years ago when abortion clinics were getting blown up and that was very much a hot button issue, yeah, it makes sense. It also just takes up so much time and energy. It makes a lot of sense to get rid of it for a movie made 20 plus years later, where the cultural relevance of that is not the same. And
but it also works particularly if you're trying to capture a certain segment of the black population, but more broadly as well, if you're trying to make certain points without getting distracted by that debate and argument. And a lot of people might have gotten...
There's the idea that there's some debate and argument among a liberal movie that's going to be mostly consumed by white people about abortion at a time when the Democratic Party is framing itself
I'm saying
as being pro-Roe a year after Roe had been... undone.
No, your point's well taken. I'm only saying that
it's not controversial to include an abortion plot. It was just bulky. That's it. It was just bulky,
okay,
and it was controversial 20 years ago, which is why it makes sense in the book. But today, it just feels like he was in an internet cafe. No, you would cut that because no one's in an internet cafe. It's just anachronistic.
Right.
You know.
Fair enough.
And it feels anachronistic reading the book today. I mean, last year whenever I read it.
But all of the. No. But again, all of those decisions and what to take out, to leave in or to leave out from the book, are done to create, I do think, this apologetic for black middle class decision making. so that even where there's the issue with the maid, as you pointed out, and the gift and all of that, by the end of the film, we're supposed to feel like the only thing that we're supposed to be concerned about is the fact that he didn't get, at the point of the end of the film, to be with the woman that he wanted to be with. And that we're supposed to feel a certain sadness for him for that. We're not supposed to feel like, certainly not supposed to feel like, well, this is what you get for making bougie decisions.
Wait, Dr. Ball, you really believe the movie wasn't critical of him for being bourgeois and having this like overly simplistic, like dismissive view of the help? Like the movie is that. This is what made me crazy about like the movie. What you can say it wasn't critical enough, but it was quite obviously and purposefully critical of the Jeffrey White character for being out of touch. He was out of touch in his relationship. He was out of touch vis-a-vis his family. He was out of touch vis-a-vis other people, other Black people in a different class situation.
But that's why I'm saying it's an apologetic, because at the end of the day, whatever that they do, whatever I'm just saying, my point is that whatever they do wrong, that we see that they do wrong, we're again, part of what invited me and others to be welcomed into the film are the imperfections. But that's the point. But it's all meant to be apologized for, made acceptable, or to seen as to be he's just a brother in struggle, trying to do the best he can.
What's the evidence of that? What in the movie? What scenes in the movie, what dialogue in the movie tells me as a viewer that I'm not supposed to think this flawed character is flawed by the end because he fell in love?
I didn't say you're not supposed to see. No. In fact, that's what I'm saying. We're supposed to see the flaw, but see the flaw as something we're supposed to identify with in terms of our own flaws.
What in the movie says to me as a viewer that I'm supposed to identify with that man's flaws instead of like
all of the struggles with how to. Just for instance, the ending, all of the struggles with how to end his story and what version to tell and how to address himself to sort of coming out of the pseudonymous closet, to so to speak, whatever. The all of that is the entire centering of him as the protagonist. As he goes through all of these struggles, making some good and some bad choices, making choices that we would identify with and some not, in a familial context.
Well, we don't identify. I think the whole point is we don't identify with any of these choices. It's an insane, almost surrealist romp that this bourgeois Black guy decides to pose as a gangbanger and allow white people cartoonishly to frame him as such and be in on the plot in order to sell books to a guilty liberal white audience. Like that's the whole, you're supposed to think that this is like dark and fucked up of him and these white people. And he, at least as a Black guy, is a little ambivalent about it, but he still goes along with it because, this is what I'm saying. I'm literally saying this, that he goes along with it because he hears more about his resentments about not being appreciated, right? He cares more about how much money he's making. He cares more about his ability to keep up his bourgeois Tony lifestyle and keep the help on staff. So he goes along with what is fundamentally a classist/racist plot. And at no point while watching that movie do I identify with that choice.
No, I think you may not have identified with it, but that was the point that caught me, and I think many others who like the film, that we are supposed to identify with various aspects of the story,
okay,
but ultimately with the idea that
you didn't identify with it and I didn't identify with it. Why do you believe
saying
that
I did.
Everyone...
But that's what I was saying was how I got caught and needed the help. Even because what I'm saying is the movie caused me to contradict my own approach to films and media in this media environment and political environment, which is just to approach them critically and to say, if I like something, I should be even more critical of it, because again, the well-studied environment that our media has found a way to bring me in so that they can get to the underlying message, which is why I'm saying everything that you're saying is largely correct in terms of what we should be seeing in this character, but we're not by the film's end, we're not supposed to focus on the fact that this is a class issue and that somebody is being invited to make these horrible choices, and we're only supposed to see that, well, damn, he didn't get the woman. he didn't end up with his woman, and we're hopeful. We're even meant, I think, meant to be hopeful that maybe if there's a part 2, she'll come around, and that other alternative ending will be there. Because that's what I'm saying. People like me, I'm saying we are invited to see ourselves and to be given justification for even the bad choices we make as we ascend and endeavor into the black middle class.
So the movie doesn't put him with the women at the end.
Right.
It makes the critique of his class status, but because you might identify with some aspect of a human being on the screen. I identify with some aspect of every human being that I've seen on any screen ever because they're a human being. That is a trick. That is a trick that's supposed to make us buy into the very bourgeois sense of superiority that the movie explicitly critiques.
Again, I don't know that it's as explicit. I don't think it's as explicit as you've seen it to be. That's my point.
So the argument is that the audience must be less savvy than me. The audience must be dumber than me. And I'm going to presume that the audience. So
that's not the way I characterize it because I'm very much appreciative of how much effort and how long this process has been going on to create a situation where today, even those like me who are highly critical and who claim and whose professional work focuses on these very issues could still, from time to time, be caught up. And that's why, so that's why for instance, when I watched most recently something in terms of commercial media that got me the series Andor or something like that, if we don't have collective, collaborative study group approaches that are highly critical, then many of us will be in a very sophisticated. That's my point. It's not that we're stupid or less savvy. Most of us. It's that it's the attempts here are incredibly sophisticated.
Everybody's been telling me to watch Andor, and I fully plan to when I'm next home and have access to my mother's Disney Plus. But you're telling me that that's also a psyop that isn't as progressive as everybody's saying it is? I'm
still catching up to that criticism because I still haven't seen all of the shortcomings. And in fact,
good.
I just did so for instance, I just did an interview with, and somebody maybe you should consider talking to as well, a woman named Samantha Youssef, who has a long career in Hollywood and working for Disney in particular, and who has also recently gone on to grad school and still doing her career, but has become highly critical, wrote a great paper, a grad project that I got to see. And part of her argument, and the way we didn't get to delve into this, and I wanted to do that next time, is that she said in this, well, you haven't seen it yet. So there's a particular scene that she uses to describe.
Well, I've seen season one.
Okay, so in season 1, when now I can't forget the actor's name, but when the main character within the prison complex, who is Andor's sort of primary antagonist, I guess initially, but who ends up leading the revolt, but doesn't himself jump. If you remember that part, that
the older guy.
The older guy with the beard, and he's saying he's the one yelling, there's one way out, and then they get to the edge and he says, I can't swim, so he doesn't jump.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to catch up to her point, but Samantha's argument, and she explained it a little bit better. We just didn't have time to stay in this point. She said, if you feel an affinity for his fear, which is what the viewer's design is supposed to, you were supposed to feel like, we're supposed to feel sorry for him or having some sort of an affinity for him, even as he does not jump and goes back into the wherever. We're not sure exactly what happens to him. That's how she's argument. That's how the film or the series in this case tricks us and captures us, so that we don't have a full. I think what she's saying, that we don't fully appreciate the escape or the need for all of us to escape our colonial boundaries. So I'm not doing her argument service, so I don't want to. But
the argument is the guy should jump to his death because he can't swim. It's not like he's just afraid and he's a coward and he gives up at the end. He's very brave throughout. He gets everybody free at great personal risk. He probably is going to go back inside and get himself killed anyway. But he knows it's certain death if he jumps off if he can't swim.
So, but the way, and again, I'm not doing her justice here, but the way I interpreted her argument is that I think we're supposed to see that as an allegory for our own fears of not joining revolutionary efforts in our lifetime. that we're supposed to, so that
But
when
Diego
someone
Luna's
says,
the hero. Diego Luna's right there as the protagonist.
I understand that, and that's why what is happening is very sophisticated, because he jumps, but we also know in the back of our minds, given the history of this thing, that all of this is for naught, because the whole planet gets destroyed. So I think that's why I'm thinking again.
Yeah.
Really, what I am biased in favor of, given what has been clearly the intent of the design of our current media environment and film in particular. The history is very clear on this. The research, I think, is very clear on this, that there is a particular way that films, especially when we go to see them in theaters, can capture our senses and our consciousness and make us very primed for subtext. So I'm admitting I'm still struggling with this, because my biases are so in favor of the dominant themes in this Andor series, and that's what I'm saying is the perniciousness of all of this, and this is that it is understood. So it goes really, like Harold Laswell, this foundational scholar in media studies, who was a pro-propagandist in the early 20th century. His argument was that the goal of propaganda is to not obviously change the conditions that oppress people, but to change our interpretation, analysis of, or reaction to those conditions. And I think that's generally how I approach all of this. So that's why when I think about the scene she's using to exemplify the subtle ways that our thought, the subtle ways that the ideas we think are being promulgated are being subverted, is to say, in that moment, the viewer is supposed to identify with the man struggling to go off, even at great risk, to your point, because we're supposed to feel that way in this life, huh?
Did you identify with that man more than Diego Luna's character?
Ever since she brought that up in our discussion, I kind of keep going back and forth in my own mind, because what I want to say is that my initial thought was, damn that. And if I can't swim, I'll figure it out when I'm down there. Because my initial thought is I'm afraid of heights. So if I had run to that ledge, my concern would have been, damn, this is way, I can swim. I'm a beautiful swimmer. But the height would have terrified me. So that would have been my moment of concern. I don't want to jump. But that's the point that I think the scene is trying to get us, is subtly trying to get us to feel in this life, that to the point that you experience on your show all the time, that when you encourage a guest to consider something left of their comfort zone, they start talking, no, that's impractical. It's idealist. It's not realistic. And that's what that scene is trying to get us to do, to say, no, maybe it is okay to not jump.
The part that I'm objecting to is the choice to read in to movies and film, like in shows that are explicitly rooting for a protagonist. Top of the call sheet, that guy is the revolutionary, does the thing, leads the revolution, jumps off the cliff, swims to safety, is the hero. If there's any other character that reflects the reality of the human experience, that some people can't swim, that some people aren't courageous, that some people aren't brave, we're supposed to say that the movie is asking us to identify not with the guy at the top of the call sheet, not the hero, not the one we're all rooting for, but the character whose name I can't even remember.
But we do that all the time. These are subtle things that happen all the time. That's why product placement is effective. And think about it. How many times?
What is the evidence? If everyone who's watching Andor, if I have like 10 texts and emails in my phone right now of people from various parts of my life saying, have you talked about Andor on the show yet? You should talk about Andor on the show yet. Because they're lefties and they see themselves reflected in the show. You're telling me that like all of those people are wrong. Everyone who sees it as the revolutionary potential is wrong. And that secretly it is mine effing everybody into being counter-revolutionary.
I don't want my argument to get lost as in some description of the condescending academic who thinks everyone is dumb and wrong. I'm simply saying that the media product that targets us is highly sophisticated, and that the structures, the ownership structures, the advertising, the investment structures, the political structures, the connection between Marvel, Disney to the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex, all of these have to be considered in terms of how we assess the final product, especially when we like it. So to the point of your question, I'll ask you, in 2008, do you remember how many leftists were condemning the run of Barack Obama as a counterinsurgent effort to suppress radical politics?
Yeah, okay.
And yet 8 years later, that's exactly what he was. So that's the point. Where most of us are not meant to pick up on these things.
Okay, here's the thing. First of all, there were people. Barack Obama existed at a time in American politics where there was not very much in the way of alternative media. The internet was relatively new. There certainly wasn't any Twitter or TikTok, or there was barely the internet. I mean, let's just be so for real right now. And the idea that there was any messaging, like there was any clarity on what he actually represented for the average passive, for me, about to start law school young person, it just is a very different dynamic. Moreover, this isn't like, I don't know. I think it's a little apples and oranges to be comparing a presidential candidate to a movie, because I'm not saying that the movie is doing a thing, like is a like movement in and of itself. But if people, it is symbolic by nature. It is iconography by nature. It doesn't have to actually, the problem with Obama is that he didn't follow through on his promises. And there were people who were able to predict that more or less than other people. In addition to obviously.
But there were people, sort of to my point though, is that, and I may, have been intentionally picking that as an example off the top of my head. So, I'm not surprised that came off that quickly. But in 2008, I just lost my thought. You had just said,
I said Barack Obama didn't follow through on his promises. A movie doesn't have any promises to keep.
Right. So, but part of what was effective for Obama, and this was even expressed by Rahm Emanuel at the time, who was his chief of staff and running his media campaign, was that the goal that made his campaign so effective was to put Obama everywhere, put his image everywhere, put his sound bites everywhere, interviewing all the time, with the idea that people couldn't keep up with the exact message, didn't know exactly what he was saying. They just took on an affinity for him. So a lot of people projected onto him things that he actually was not saying, and were not paying attention to the things that he was saying and who he was putting in his cabinet, and then put all of this onto him, so that there was this sort of dissonance that had to be caught up to when it appeared to be that he wasn't doing what people thought he was going to do. But my only point is that the projection of Obama in terms of his media presence was meant to convey something that tapped into something that was very much desired in the electorate. And that's what I'm saying Andor does. And I've seen interviews. Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Let me ask you this. And I asked this during the American Fiction episode. Is there a piece of media that you like, that you think is positive and lefty?
It's a very good question. Not in terms of popular commercial media. I can't think of any. Now I want to be clear to draw the distinction that what I like is a lot. What I think is politically valuable, that's a whole different category. So this is sort of my point, that we should be more critical of things that we do like, because they are often not doing the thing politically that we think that they do. So off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that satisfies that. So
two things. One, I think it's okay to like things. I think this is somehow an extremely radical position among like left critical spaces. But I'm going to be the Norman Rockwell painting guy and stand up in the crowd and say, I think it's okay to like stuff because it's fun and entertaining.
But remember, my criticism is not that. I'm not.
No. I understand.
I agree with you. I'm not judging people for liking things.
Okay, but I want to be clear. That was really important for me to say in the context of the American Fiction episode, because for me in the podcast conversation that I was hosting, I was evaluating the movie as an entertainment product, not as some vehicle for a lefty revolution. And the unwillingness for anyone to even like engage with it on that level, like was it a good movie, was a little frustrating. Because we can get the second half of it if it has encoded messages that are like bad or whatever. But like it seemed like there was like honor honor among this group and never admitting that they liked anything ever in a way that I find to be a little bit exhausting, I gotta say.
And this is why I intentionally approached this Vernon philosophy. By the way, Vernon was a brother that I delivered pizzas with years and years ago. And one night after work, he said, I'm never going to see another movie with a black person in it because they always make us look bad. And then my joke used to be 30 years later and hundreds of $1,000s of student loan debt, I came to, conclude the same thing. And with, some jokes and some nuance. But my point is simply, so I'm not, and we had an interesting disagreement, Vernon and I, back in the parking lot, so many years ago. And but my real point though is that is just that we are going to be invited with increasing, again, sophistication and skill to like these media product. And I don't, so, and in fact, I argue in this Vernon philosophy that it's really just an intellectual boycott of sorts. I'm not actually saying don't go see these things. I'm not going that far to say avoid them. I'm saying engage the media with a little bit more criticism, because I do agree, I do agree that there is no such thing as entertainment. All of it is political, and the more actually can be done to subvert our radical desires under the guise of entertainment than anything else. But at the same time, I also give room and acknowledge for myself and others that I'm going to like and watch a lot of stupid stuff. So I'm not, maybe it's a way to be, an apologia for me, but I'm just saying, like, I just want to, that's why I'm saying when I like something, I try to, as I encourage with my students, just be more critical of it and ask yourself, why do I like it? How do I know what I know, and why do I like what I like?
I really appreciate that. Like, I am a person, if you like to see a movie and you want to leave and be happy and not say anything in the car other than that was a great movie, don't go see a movie with me. I will ruin your life. But the more I like something, the more I tend to have something to say about it. I just am willing to acknowledge that I enjoyed it as a culture product, and that is not always an easy road. Jared Ball, I haven't introduced to you yet. Dr. Ball is a professor of communications and Africana Studies at Morgan State University. He's also the author of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power and the host of the podcast, I Mix What I Like. I've been looking at that on your shirt as we've been talking about what we like, and I've been wanting to scream, I like what I like, in the same intro tone that you that you have. I mix what I like at the beginning of your podcast episodes. That being said, while we're on this topic, I know this is not why I asked you to come in here today, but I have to ask what you make of the new Superman film and the fact that it got so much pushback from Zionists who, unprovoked, read themselves in as the antagonist of that movie.
I think they were right to do that. And I think, if I saw correctly, these interview snippets and little paragraphs here and there of interviews, that the filmmakers intended to convey that message. And I think the message, do you think they did?
Because
from what I get, they seem pretty clear that this is intending to be a message. It's meant to be anti-war. I believe they've come even very close to saying that this is a critique of the war in Gaza or the genocide.
See,
I don't know if
I've heard people say Ukraine. Like, because my understanding was that the timeline of the movie being made was that it didn't necessarily match up with Gaza, but Ukraine started, 2 years ago.
It's just those very brown people that Superman is there to go save at the end. I mean, it's clear that they're taking shots. I think Lex Luthor is an Elon Musk character. I think the what was it, Baravian leader could be probably Putin, or conversely Netanyahu. I've seen, but to where I thought maybe where you're going with your question is that so in other words, I do think that there is the both liberal and conservative read that this is a condemnation of what's being done to Palestinians, but my problem with that is that the film's approach to that liberal criticism is very liberal counterinsurgent in the way that it's saying, but at the end of the day, even the colonized, even this oppressed community waiting to suffer genocide, all that they're going to do is raise the flag of Superman and pray for him to come save us. And it becomes from my vantage point, we must then wait for Western man, super Western man, to come and save everybody, which is again what we would be expected as an audience to walk out of if you are accepting the liberal narrative that this was meant to be a critique on what's happening in Palestine. Then you walk out of there feeling like I've done something to contribute to my side of the struggle, and I think even unconsciously or subconsciously with this feeling of the U.S. or some other Western U.S. allied power is going to come and be the savior of all of these problems. And for certainly North American, United States audiences, I would absolutely expect that they were encouraged to walk out saying that whatever's going on over there with the Jews and the Muslims, we're the saviors. And as soon as Trump or maybe the next Democrat gets elected, if you're more liberal, gets their head straight, then that's probably the intent of the film, that the next Democratic president is going to get their head, and then here comes America, and whatever we do is going to solve the problem. And I think, so that's in quick summation what I think of the film.
Okay, I think that it is fair to say that if I were designing a film, I would want the hero not to be a magical extraterrestrial force that does not actually exist on Earth, but something self-actualized that people could model their own revolutionary moment on. That being said, in the context of what is, in fact, a Superman movie, accepting the constraints and the expectations of a Superman movie, it did feel very bold for all the reasons that you alluded to before about the investment in this by the state and the military in the development of these big properties, these Disney films, these Marvel films, and the propaganda that is very purposefully added. David Sirota wrote a book on this. Many people have written about this, obviously, but about the way that the Army works closely with all of these war films and like lends tanks and equipment and all of these things in exchange for some narrative input into the film, and the ways that this shapes it is frankly propaganda. It's like very bald-faced propaganda. But because of all of that, the fact that somehow this movie got made, where the parallels, I thought when people were talking about how this was like a loosely coded Gaza film, that it was going to be pretty subtle. It wasn't subtle. This guy, I've heard the Netanyahu comparison. I've also said he looks like some other previous Israeli prime minister. I forget which one, but I remember seeing the photo and I was like, oh yeah, he looks just like that guy. There's a scene where he's like got this ambiguous sort of like European accent, but to your point, is living in a territory adjacent to all of these brown people. So it does beg the question, where in the world is this supposed to be? Is this some kind of European settler colony next to all of these brown people? At one point, he's been given, someone brings him a bagel from like what sounds like, I forget which one, some historically Jewish New York neighborhood. He's like, I just came from Park Slope with this bagel. Yeah. I mean, they don't say bagel. They say donut. But low key, I was like, is that a bagel? And when they say donut, I was like, ooh, this is a little heavy handed, even for me, I gotta say. Like they are not being subtle with this. How did this get through? Like,
well, but again, why? But I understand where folks see a difference in our political climate with Trump in office, but Hollywood this is to me traditional Hollywood. It's a very liberal approach. It's saying we recognize there's a problem in the world, we recognize there's conflict or war. We're not going to call it genocide, whatever. But the solution we're offering is again one that the military industrial complex is not going to be threatened about. They're not going to pull the plug on this. The elite who own these media product are not going to be upset by it. And again, because at the end of the day, the solution to the problem is Western man, not radical struggle, not an Al-Aqsa flood, not political organization.
He's an immigrant. But I mean, like part of the controversy around the movie is that Superman is an immigrant from space and is therefore being criticized by the right on that basis. So like, I don't.
But the
Yeah, go ahead,
tradition.
go ahead.
So part of what I've seen left out of this, and I would invite you and others to check out the work of my homeboy Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows on this in particular. But the history of the comic is important here, and I feel like a lot of that has been left out of the discussion. Remember, Superman is created by Jews as an allegory for the Jewish experience in the United States. Where
By a Cleveland, a proud Clevelander. If you land at CLE Airport, you see a cutout of Superman by the baggage claim. Cleveland Rock. Sorry, please continue. I got
shout out to Ohio. Okay, no doubt. Shout out to Cleveland. So part of the embedded theme within Superman is the immigrant alien, but retold obviously as an alien from outer space as opposed to an alien from Eastern Europe who can come here and assimilate and become. Now in the film we hear constantly he wants to be a human. He's a human. I'm a human. I have all the traits of a human. From what I understand, I was not a Superman comic fan in particular, but from what I understand just historically is that Superman's, most of what he was arguing was I'm an American. I'm here to be, because ultimately all of these superheroes are Batman, Superman, all of them defend the state, all of them have no real problem with capitalism and fascism and all of that, and the police and all that. So he's here to bring quote unquote law and order back to liberal democracy and neoliberal capitalism.
That's usually how it goes. However, to your very point, they don't say, I'm an American this time around. He says, I'm a human this time around. Mm-hmm. And he's not defending the state. Do you recall, this is I think maybe one of the more radical aspects of the movie that frankly I haven't seen a lot of commentary on. The posture of the film, if I recall correctly, is that Elon Musk, sorry. I totally don't even need to do that, sorry. Lex Luthor has is basically selling weapons to the United States, a la Elon Musk. He's a weapons contractor. And that he stands to benefit from this ongoing conflict between fake Israel and fake Palestine, Bavaria and whatever they call this brown country. And that part of what has rankled the American state actors, right, that we see in like a dark room plotting at various points in the film. This is the United States of America. American government is the bad guy conspiring with Elon Musk. Is that they're mad at Superman, who is kind of like is very popular and is like an American hero, but they're mad at Superman because he's stopped a war. He has interfered with international politics and prevented a war from happening from which Elon Musk / America would benefit. So from the start of the movie, Superman is actually at odds with the American state. Now, this is the thing that happens.
The very conservative, radically right American state, not the liberal democratic espouse. Like, he's not fundamentally opposed to what this country is up to.
I hear that point, but again, this movie was started to be made a long time before we knew that Trump was going to be president, and we don't see the president. If I recall, do we see the president, or do we just see the
I don't think at all.
Congress members? So we don't know. It kind of sidesteps the politics of America, of who's actually in charge. And I think the enemy is just America. It's not about the Republicans being bad. If you want to read it that way, and I'm sure many liberals might choose to read it that way, but the critique is broader than that. It's the faceless, nameless American government is willing to go in cahoots with a follicularly challenged, narcissistic arms dealer from another country, although he's doing an American accent in this one, Nicholas Hoult, and is willing to go to war for profit in a way that Superman, with his higher morals and ideals, who's more connected with his humanity than any profit scheme, is willing to allow. And so they have the comms issue of what to do about the fact that America loves Superman because he's supposed to represent American values, but what the American state wants to actually do is antithetical to what Superman's values are and what America's values are. And that is a very radical proposition for a Marvel movie, it seems to me.
Okay, but again, with the important caveat that no radical solutions are offered, and it's sort of just a return to normalcy that the film encourages. And by normalcy, they mean liberal democratic or neoliberal democratic rule. And that's what I think is the clear point of the film. So it's, again, if it's not an anti-colonial film. It's not, as I'm continuing to learn from May Gant and others, it's not third cinema. This is very much first cinema, corporate machine product. And it may be entertaining. We may or may not like it. It may or may not make us laugh at points, but it's definitely not. It's meant to make sure that when you walk out of there, the affinity you have for those brown people is limited at them holding up a flag for Superman. As long as they don't hold up.
You really think that's true?
Oh, absolutely.
You think that when we walk out of the film, the average person's feelings are that our empathy with this population is only read through their value to highlight the savior of Superman, who, by the way, is not the one that saves them in the film. To be clear, if we recall, Superman does not come to save the Palestinians. They raise the flag, but Superman has to go, be off somewhere else, closing a chasm to the center of the world or something. And the third string team of the nerdy black guy, the Green Lantern, and the lady with the wings.
And the molecular dude, right? The amorphous.
Is that the Green Lantern?
No, because it's the Green Lantern dude is the leader, then the nerdy black dude and the woman with the wings, but then they bring in the fourth, the one who joins the team at the end, the
element guy who can turn into any element. Right. Okay.
So again, I mean, my point. So you're right. So when I'm saying Superman, what I mean is that the superheroes they literally work for the U.S. government, as they keep repeatedly telling us throughout the film. We have the authority of the U.S. government to do what we're doing. Whether it's Superman or some other superhero.
Right? They break. Those three break and do what the government doesn't want them to do, which is to come and interfere and save the Palestinians.
Okay, to be perfectly honest, I don't remember that exact detail. I'll defer to you on that, because either way, I don't think it changes my point that the goal still is that these still sanctioned, and then of course we see at the end that the what I do appreciate about the film is that the dominant media are portrayed as just blowing with the wind and being easily dragged from one polar claim to its opposite in an instant. But immediately they're brought back on the side of this, as I like where you put this third string team, they're brought back on the side of Superman. They all reconnect in some sort of friendly way. And again, no revolutionary or radical politics needed, no critical questions about how we got here in the first place or what does the reestablishment of the norm mean. None of that is brought in. And so by the end, I think we're all meant to feel like, look, this is it. At the end of the day, Western man or men and a woman and even a black one are going to come in here and save everybody.
Even the black one, even the black one. Mr. Terrific, Mr. Fantastic.
Mr. Terrific, that's terrific. And then we got Terrific. Fantastic in the four. Right.
Yeah, no, Captain, the movie with, what's that Green Party, Captain Marvelous. Do you ever see Captain Marvelous with
Captain Marvelous or Captain Marvel? Oh, I don't know. No. Captain Marvelous?
It's got, why am I doing this? The guy, Viggo Mortensen. It's got Viggo Mortensen, who's famously a Green Party voter and advocate and a lefty and a fantastic fella. And I won't get into it if you haven't seen the movie, but I would be curious to know, maybe... What?
His movie, that Green Book movie.
I know. Don't talk to me about the Green Book.
No, but I'm only saying that's the movie that got me to actually write up the Vernon philosophy. So it's funny you mentioned him. So
I never saw it. I like to pretend it didn't exist. One day it'll corner me on a plane somewhere and I'll succumb. But I prefer, that's not part of my personal mind canon. Don't remind me of the Green Book.
I don't even think you should do it. I think you should just avoid it, even when you're stuck on a plane.
I have no interest. If somehow I get cornered, I'm at a drive-through and it's between that and the newest Planet of the Apes movie, I guess I would pick the Green Book because I've already had the painful experience of watching the latest Planet of the Apes movie at a drive-in in the back of an uncomfortable Mini Cooper. But I will.
You went to a drive-in theater in the back of a Mini Cooper?
It's a long story.
Yeah, that's wild. That's an
story.
Interesting choice. Yeah, okay.
It's a long story. Mini Cooper is no longer in my life. However,
salute to the drive-in, though. I'm impressed that you did that. I would have thought you're too young to have experienced that.
I am. Well, you know what? I'm at a ripe old age where I welcome any comment about me being young. Yes, I am young. how young, how crazy and anachronistic for me, a very young woman, to even know what a drive-in is. Oh my God! What do I, as someone who could be plausibly born in the 21st century?
Well, we know
am I?
As you've been reminded lately, you are a reader, so I'm not surprised you know everything.
Hello. Okay, so that was a Norman Finkelstein reference. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of why we're supposed to be here tonight. Dr. Jared Ball, as you know, when I recently spoke to fan favorite, one of my favorite guests, Norman Finkelstein, we had a little bit of a dust up toward the end because we were having a broader conversation about Zoran Mamdani and what he meant to the left and what he meant to movement politics. And if he's successful, if that means that I have to reevaluate my own theory of change. And we're going back and forth. And earlier in the conversation, Norm had alluded to what would be done to the movement, the harm that would be done to the movement if, God forbid, anything actually happened to the safety of Zoran Mamdani, and how it would be really debilitating to the movement. And I kind of pushed back and said, I think that we have to frame that differently. We can't allow a movement to rise or fail on the success of any one leader. I think we have to have more grit than that. And the conversation moved on. And then later in the conversation, I raised the question of whether or not all of the assassinations of the 1960s had a really stultifying effect on the movements, the protest movements of the 1950s and 60s. And Norm Finkelstein sort of objected to the impact that all of those assassinations, from Malcolm X to Martin Luther King to even the Kennedys, although to be so clear, I don't raise them because they have enormous revolutionary potential, but because they had enough to apparently to get themselves killed. And he sort of pushed back against that, saying, I don't think that those assassinations actually had that much of effect. And at the time of the context of the episode, I was frustrated. I don't have the same historical knowledge to refute that claim as someone like yourself does, Dr. Ball. But you went ahead and did your own response to it on your own podcast, I Mix What I Like, that I encourage people to go and listen to. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk with me about what you wish I would have said and what your response is to the idea that the massive numbers of assassinations over the course of the 1960s, what effect that they had on the movements of the period.
So first of all, I don't remember watching it and feeling like I wish you had done anything differently. I, in fact, think in general that with that show and in most cases, you're even in this one, you raise disagreement and challenge your guests quite well. So I didn't really have any. I was more flabbergasted by the position he was taking and what he was trying to argue than I would have been in your or anyone else's ability to quickly respond in that moment. And I had a little bit of time and distance to think about it and still think that there needs to be more said about it. But essentially, I just bristled at. And this is also, to be fair, connected to the interview I did with him a couple of years ago and some reverberating effects of related responses to that and to his book, the Burning Bridges book. So like a lot of this is in my head as I was listening to your interview, watching your interview, and then listening to his response and thinking about it, which is, so I bristled at his or anyone's condemnation or dismissiveness or diminution of any kind of radical efforts of the past or of today. So I was just bothered by the anti-historical approach that he was bringing to the conversation to justify what I think are, again, very liberal centrist politics that he wants to project as more radical than they are. So instead of just simply saying, acknowledging certain histories and just simply saying, I don't agree with them, and this is why I think we need to move in this way, which I think would have been more honest, he first wanted to undermine those ideas and politics and struggles so that we could reach a more, again, mature conclusion that he wants us to reach about how to approach, whether it's Mamdani or electoral politics or politics in general. So for him or anyone to, again, you don't have to agree with the Panthers or the Revolutionary Action Movement or the Black Liberation Army or any of the figures associated with those struggles to have to acknowledge what they did, that they existed, they had arguments, ideas, that they did engage in some cases violently with the state. They produced political prisoners, some of whom are still in prison to this day or who are being let out just in time to die. And the state has been very clear in its counterintelligence program documents, in its counterinsurgency documents, in its sort of state-sanctioned scholarship and journalism. It has been very clear that there has been a concerted that they see Black communities and others, indigenous, Latin Americans, and even working class labor struggles as insurgent elements that need to be targeted as you would any national or anti-colonial struggle overseas. And they brought those very same tactics back to bear here in the United States and have been more or less open about it in a variety of ways that a scholar like Finkelstein should be appreciative of. So to say that no one got killed or only 3 people got killed and they weren't really a threat and Mamdani represents more of a threat than people in the Black Liberation Movement of some years ago is historically unsupported by the data, is as polite the way I can put it. And it was just a disturbing approach, and one that really does bother me in general, as I said, which is just what happens a lot today, that there's an attempt to rebrand what is radical, rebrand what is revolutionary, rebrand some of those histories, and then ultimately to diminish or to disrespect the ideas struggling for socialism or national liberation or something of that. We're supposed to, certainly Pan-Africanism under scientific socialism, we're not supposed to advocate for that at all. So when I see interviews like that, I admit get a little bit irritated and wanted to say something about it. But again, to be clear, I thought you did a pretty good job in being critical of what he was doing in that context. And I just hope that others would see the interview, feel a certain same kind of way, and then want to revisit some of those histories and struggles, especially as I know we're taping this now, we're only a day or so out of another commemoration of Black August, which is a good time to revisit some of these histories of liberation struggles and to sort of hopefully recommit ourselves to those struggles. So, yeah.
Well, where would you want to start digging back into some of these histories? Because I appreciate you saying that you didn't think that I did so poorly, but I remember, I felt like I was struggling to list, frankly, just to list out as many assassinations as I know exist, but I was just struggling in the moment. Fred Hampton, I was just,
Well, he said only. First of all, he was wrong in that. First of all, I mean, even when he said Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were only 2 of 3 to be assassinated, he's not only wrong in that, but to be specifically technical, Mark Clark was not being targeted for assassination, and the argument is that he wasn't even shot by the police. He was killed by the discharge of that something about the discharge of a weapon he was holding was actually what killed him, but it was in response to the invasion of the house. Anyway, it doesn't. But the point being, I'm just simply saying that they were there to not only target Fred Hampton, but part of what gets left out of even in Finkelstein's or my own rendition of that, poor rendition of that, is that Eugene O'Neill had been sent to work undercover for the FBI and Chicago police to infiltrate Hampton's organization and then ultimately drug his drink so that Hampton could not awaken and resist when the police invaded the house to come there and assassinate him. Norm Finkelstein leaves out that Akua and Jerry, Fred Hampton's widow, was not only 8 months pregnant with Fred Jr., who's out here in the world today, but said herself that she heard the police officers acknowledge that Fred was still alive and then went over and shot him again in the head to confirm that he was dead. And that all of this was being done under the auspices of the federal government and the counterintelligence program that was attacking similarly Black Panther Party and other radicals throughout the country. And not just Black ones, by the way. So I would encourage people, just for the sake of both of our memories, I would encourage people to just check out, for instance, the Freedom Archive's great documentary. You can find it online, Counterintelligence, COINTELPRO 101, to give you give viewers a simple but powerful overview of that program and how it targeted Chicanos and indigenous folks and Asian and white radicals, as well as the Black Liberation Movement, and often did so violently. The amount of infiltration that Finkelstein leaves out. So even if we don't get to the level of actually assassinating someone, the infiltration, the false jacketing and attempts to destroy people's credibility in the press, to pit people against each other. I remember years ago, I was in DC at the 35th anniversary of the Black Panther Party reunion. And I was able to sit in a room and overhear discussions, some of which included members of the party reuniting after decades and coming to terms in clarity around and becoming clear around what had been done to create disunity against them. And I literally overheard a conversation between two Black women talking about how they hadn't talked and hated each other for years because of letters that had been written to them ostensibly by the other, that neither of them had written. And that this was part of the process of the FBI's attempt to create disunity among the Panthers and others. Never mind Sam Neill was killed, if I remember correctly, in part of a fratricidal struggle between the Panthers that had been inspired, this East Coast, West Coast beef that is more popularly in my generation recounted in terms of Biggie and Pac, but was really initiated for real in terms of disuniting the Black Panther Party, East Coast and West Coast, which importantly to Finkelstein, which he would never acknowledge or be aware to, but which had their own different political and cultural bases and origins as they formed this one national party, and that the FBI was clear to use those differences to play the groups against one another. So even when he's talking about how Bobby Hutton is one of the few, why was Hutton and Cleaver being targeted? Why were the police there in the first place? Hutton wasn't even the main target. So again, he wants to say that Cleaver was someone that in Huey Newton are people not to be properly remembered and appreciated, but at the time the state felt differently. And at the time the broader international radical or revolutionary struggles all over the world felt differently. And the state's own documents seem to indicate that they felt differently, given all that was said in those documents about Cleaver and Huey Newton and Malcolm X before them, and Dr. King even, and Elijah Muhammad, and so many others, in terms of the threat that they posed to bringing the United States, and particularly Black people in the United States, into a sort of insurgent fervor that teamed up with the decolonizing movements around the world. Very lastly, even when, if I remember correctly, Finkelstein said something about Dr. King. He made a number of errors about that in recounting Dr. King. But one of the points that I always want to remind people of is that Dr. King, even at the point of the 1963 I Have a Dream speech, which many of us have over the time in our lives condemned as this soft, liberal, unimpressive moment, from the perspective of the state, William C. Sullivan in particular, King was seen as the biggest threat in bringing the so-called Negro over to communism and infidelity with the Cuban Revolution of just a few years earlier. So all that to say, and I'm happy to come back to more, is that when Finkelstein or anyone else wants to, whatever they want to say in building up Mamdani or Bernie Sanders or anyone else, I think it needs to be done in juxtaposition to these movements and histories, not as extensions of, or as Finkelstein was trying to say, as advances from, because they certainly were not. Yeah. So I'll just stop there for.
Yeah.
I think I've been just running on.
I think that to me was the most confusing thing. I mean, I think the idea that you should be sort of known by your enemies, that the hatred you attract, to half quote Bernie, is a demonstration of your integrity, is such a commonly cited truism on the left. And I can appreciate, in the context of Mamdani, why it has drawn so many people close to him. As you saw all of the establishment figures align themselves against him and wrap themselves in the Israeli flag and try to claim that he's anti-Semitic and peddle in Islamophobia while doing so. I mean, it makes you want to bear hug him. It makes you want to protect him. And to sort of acknowledge that, well, he must be doing something right if he's pissing off all of the right people. And to look at the people who were quite literally assassinated and not sort of read into them as well the same threat that they pose the state, or a greater threat that they pose to the state, is a little confusing and inconsistent for me. And for me, the purpose of sort of pushing back against the idea that if something happened to Mamdani, it would be demoralizing. To me, it's necessary to guard ourselves against that demoralization, precisely because it seemed to me that there's a historical precedent for, yes, the broad public having been demoralized in exactly that way after not just one, but a whole spate of assassinations that went so high as to kill off the president of the United States and a prospective future president of the United States. And I found myself confused by the reluctance to acknowledge the significance of those earlier movements. And I think that the thing that he said about King that you might have been alluding to is the idea that he was sort of milquetoast, neoliberal, not sufficiently radical. And to your point, I think many people have made that criticism, but they also point out that the point at which he was killed was when he was doing this cross-racial class pivot and organizing the sanitation workers and doing labor strikes in a way that really put the spikes to the gears of the economy, threw the wrench in the gears of the economy.
That was what you reminded me. That was also what bothered me because Finkelstein said that people in the civil rights movement around King had become troubled with him because of his temperament, or something to that effect. And that is one of the more anti-historical things that he said in that regard, in that discussion, because what bothered people around King about King was, to your point, his radicalization, his stance against Vietnam, his saying black people's struggle is the same as the anti-colonial struggles in Africa and Latin America, his condemnation of capitalism, and specifically his condemnation of white liberals and the black bourgeoisie. He was relentless against those two groups at the end of his life. So that really, again, that's why I was saying what also really bothers me that I want to, I mentioned Black August, what also really, one of the assassinations that, of course, Finkelstein left out was, and that I did too up to this point, is that of George Jackson, who, and his brother Jonathan, for that matter, a year earlier in August of 1970. And George Jackson's assassination in 71 prompted, as Dr. Orasami Burton has been so brilliantly writing about in Tip of the Spear, what he calls the Long Attica Revolt. George Jackson's assassination prompted really the modern anti-prison movement, the modern abolition movement, the last 50 years of prison struggle and seeing the prison as a site of struggle and war, as Burton points out. And specifically that, as Burton points out, it's war conducted in prisons against prisoners in a way that's meant to relate very much in terms of technique, tactics, and strategy to how those of us supposedly outside of those walls are dealt with vis-a-vis narrative development, propaganda, psychological warfare, and military violence if necessary. So, and really what I'm just trying to say is that by diminishing, and again, I love George Jackson. He is when people say who's your favorite whatever, and people are talking about the goats of this, the goats of that, he's my goat of liberation struggle.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about why? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
I'll happily do that. But I just wanted to the point I'm making is that because a lot of people will find George Jackson difficult politically to side with, as I'll explain in a minute. But my point is, it's not a matter of whether we do or don't agree with him or others. The point is, we have to recognize what they meant in terms of the history and to the struggle and to the fear they projected or inspired among those in the ruling elite, and who were very clear about that. Now, George was someone arrested, I think, around 1959, age 17 or so, for petty robberies and crimes. He's caught in California and put in He's originally from Chicago, but he's arrested in California and given a year to life sentence that becomes a life sentence because they just kept adding time. And in prison, he becomes radicalized and becomes one of the more powerful figures in not only Soledad and San Quentin, but within the prison system, and then ultimately becomes, even from within the prison walls, was he given the Minister of Defense? I forgot the exact title he was given within the Black Panther Party. And he was seen by Huey Newton as like the only one, something like the one Huey thought was the most respectable member of the party, something like that. So, and George was a communist. He advocated for armed struggle. He advocated for conflict within an understanding that there needed to be such conflict to decolonize, to free ourselves, that this state had to be brought to its knees. And he endeavored to bring that into reality, even from within from within prisons. And he wrote, of course, Soledad Brother, and then posthumously published Blood in My Eye, which he said was the book he meant to have be his standing political manifesto, given his disappointment with the liberal re-editing of Soledad Brother. And his assassination. And to this day, his books are banned in prisons often and seen as contraband. But to me, Blood in My Eye is the political Bible, so to speak. But again, my point would still be that whatever we feel about George or his arguments, that he and his brother Jonathan and the efforts he made in the Marin County Courthouse Rebellion are, I think, to be respected and honored, but at least appreciated in terms of their contribution to the struggle. And again, the fear they inspired in the state that did respond in a certain way and continues to respond in certain ways as a result, leading us to a place where Mamdani only exists. And pick any other leader, they only exist having come in the still aftermath of those previous struggles. And I think we have to recognize that, even again to our previous conversation, when we like them or we like what we hear them saying, we, I think, need to start looking carefully at, and I haven't looked enough at Mamdani, but look more carefully at what they're actually doing, what are the policies they're advocating, what limitations are going to be imposed on them by their own political party. And then look carefully at what distinguishes them from revolutionaries of the past, and just say, look, I may not be a revolutionary, I may prefer something different from that, but at least acknowledge that this revolutionary history exists without being disrespectful to it. That's, I guess, you know.
I think part of what it feels to me like there's like an inconsistency that I'm constantly wrestling with, where some of the messaging will be, let's say movements are from the bottom up, they're from the grassroots. It doesn't matter about celebrity endorsements. It doesn't matter if a celebrity is part of your project. Celebrities shouldn't talk about politics. You hear that kind of messaging. And on the other hand, we'll have just discussed the time, money, effort that the government will put into influencing the messaging of a major Marvel movie, or war movie, G.I. Joe or whatever. On one hand, we'll say, someone might argue that the assassinations in the 1960s didn't matter, and on the other hand, allude to how demoralizing it would be for a movement for our contemporary heroes to no longer be with us. I feel as though, I had a guest on recently, Corbin Trent, who was AOC's first comms person, who was making the case that distributed organizing, the sort of door knocking that is really celebrated, in particular on the left, and which I do think has had a significant effect in certain elections, especially when there's a smaller voter turnout elections, was not actually dispositive in AOC's race, he argued, as compared to the kind of unexpected media attention she got after Joe Crowley, her opponent, declined to show up at a debate and sent a Latina woman instead, in a way that felt sort of like racial and dismissive. And And whether or not you agree with his take, it seems obvious to me that the people in power who are winning all the time wouldn't be putting all of the energy into media and spending on ads and flooding your mailbox with pamphlets claiming that Nina Turner hates Democrats and called Biden half a bowl of shit. They wouldn't be doing all of that if it didn't have an effect. And it seems wrong to give up on those messaging battles or to not celebrate messaging battles that we might accidentally win, like the New York Times covering AOC, not realizing the effect it was going to have, or this Superman movie being interpreted as being pro-Palestine when there's so little mainstream pro-Palestinian media. It seems to me like we should sort of take the win and not cede ground when we have the possibility to make a difference there. And that's not to say we should all just be tweeting all day or making TikToks all day instead of knocking doors. But I don't know why it has to constantly be this either or. Why am I saying all that? I'm saying all of that because I feel like there's this weird pressure to actually make a choice, and that there's a kind of a sense that one's own integrity is undermined if you say that you're happy that a Superman film is being interpreted as pro-Palestine, and that the being pro-Palestine and critical of Israel is mainstreaming in any way. Does it have to be deeper than that? And I'm afraid to even ask you about a film like Judas and the Black Messiah. Is it a good thing that movie was made and that it familiarized people with the assassination of Fred Hampton? Or do you think whatever, I'm sure, criticism that you have of it in the ways that I'm sure is not as radical as it could have been is a sort of undermining the movement, like counter to our desires within the movement space? I mean, how do you see, here's the question, sorry. Yeah. How do you see the value of media as someone who is a professor of communications and Africana Studies? Do you see any of the propaganda that is disseminated through the media as beneficial to us, or are you fundamentally wary of it?
So I acknowledge a bias, and I acknowledge even where I may at times be too narrow in this, but my general initial approach is that I don't see any value in any of these media product. I didn't want Judas and the Black Messiah to be made. I don't want, this is where, to the point of my Vernon philosophy, I would prefer in many ways that the old style of media production exists, where Black people either disappear or are relegated to very stereotypical roles that make it so obvious that what's happening is happening. This sophisticated evolution of media product in response to Black and other communities saying we want to see ourselves, we want to be included, has been fine. You want to see yourself? You even want some of your radical stories to be told? We're going to tell them all. We're going to give them all to you, but in very carefully constructed ways that assure you never extend the politics, at least nominally said to be the subject, into your current world. So the parallel that I see in terms of the elections and these films is that, to your point, I do think it is a sign of good when people hear something like free buses and some form of redistribution and some form of we care about other humans and say, yes, that's what I want. I don't want this fascistic blah, blah, blah. But what I'm very concerned about is that those in power have been studying this for very long and have been trying to work with this for a very long time. That is how to, again, adjust people to their oppression in a way that their public opinion will not congeal around something revolutionary or radical. So that's why just before we even get to the details, my issues with Bernie and Mamdani are largely the same. Whatever good comes out that sounds good is in the context of what will ultimately be a Democratic Party decision. And we've seen historically, as Glenn Ford had pointed out for a long time, the Democratic Party is where radical politics and movements go to die. So that's sort of my point. When people, the unconscious desire for revolution and inclusion and symbol and messaging in the case of wanting to see radical politics or black representation in visibility in film or elsewhere, that is a righteous desire, one to be fed, not to be dismissed or discouraged. But those in power recognize that and say, fine, so we'll give you a Judas and the Black Messiah. We'll say it's about Fred Hampton, but we're going to center it on the snitch. We're gonna reduce the FBI to one bad apple that is Hoover and juxtapose him against the good guy FBI agent. And we're going to diminish all the politics and ideas that Fred was working with. So you're not going to get an invitation to some sustained engagement with socialism and internationalist politics and in armed self-defense, which Fred was an absolute proponent of. You're not going to get any of that. So I engaged. You know, there were friends of mine involved on some aspects of that film. I've been friendly at times over the years in a comradely way with Fred Hampton Jr. And we did a discussion about this where I shared with and my point from the beginning, with even one of my colleagues was in discussions about this years in advance with Ryan Coogler, and I even said then, please tell him not to make the movie. Please, we don't need a Fred Hampton movie to promote a radical politics or the memory of Fred Hampton. What we need are movements that would propel, and again, this would be the parallel, and I'll stop here, to electoral politics. We need movements that are ground up, that propel the ideas and the memories and the narratives and the politicians and their platforms if we want to have any meaningful engagement with either media or politics. And too much of it is we've been conditioned and encouraged and found ourselves in an imposed environment that we're supposed to wait for, as is the case with Superman, great Western man, to come down. Somebody from the Democratic Party, give us something. Somebody from Hollywood, give us something. And it has to be the exact opposite way. Yeah,
I'm really hearing you. And I guess I'm wrestling with here's what it is. No one who's listened to me for more than 20 minutes at a stretch doesn't know how skeptical I am of the Democratic Party. I don't know that there is a relatively mainstream voice in the bread tube space that is more pro third party than I am. I just don't know that person exists. That being said, I am also an advocate of exploiting these elections that happen every 2 to 4 years as attention opportunities to either expose the cravenness of the Democratic Party and to run candidates, sometimes by running candidates that will attract the ire of Democrats who will be attacked in ways that demonstrate what Democratic Party priorities are, who can get into debates and again expose the emptiness of the politics of the mainstream candidates, and to make the argument for why the Democratic Party ain't it. I do advocate for that. I desperately wanted the left to have a candidate in the last election, not because the revolution's going to come through a kind of a Bernie Sanders style insurgency necessarily, but because the fact of Bernie Sanders running in 2016 and 2020 did mobilize a lot of people, did get people like me engaged in politics, does seem to have a constructive effect. And for that reason, I hope Shrikant Chakrabarti does beat Nancy Pelosi. And if I have to pick, does he win or does he not? Obviously, I will hope he thrashes her. You know what I mean? But regardless of my skepticism of what it means to engage with Democrats sort of in good faith, or to run as a Democrat in good faith. And I think I similarly have an attitude that's, with respect to my feelings about media. Like, if we are starting from the position that most media is bad and the overwhelming messaging in it is going to be supportive of establishment politics and the status quo, the same way the Democratic Party is, can I still count it as a win if somebody sneaks something else in there, if something else makes it through? If, for whatever reason, if the Superman movie makes Ben Shapiro have a meltdown over how Hollywood is anti-Zionist, it's hard for me not to count that as a win. The same way as if Zohran Mamdani thrashing Cuomo and winning the primary with more votes than anybody in a New York primary ever, while saying, I'm not going to Israel, damn it, and, glorify the Intifada. It's hard for me not to just pound my fist and be like, right on. That's a win, even if I do have my skepticism of the Democratic Party. And frankly, holding this view, I understand that it makes me sound sort of, all over the place and sort of schizophrenic in my analysis. I don't 100% know what to do with that. It's like we live in the world that we live in. And it's hard not to, it seems wasteful to exploit the opportunities to use the media and the electoral opportunities and the political opportunities that are in front of us to advance our case, while simultaneously investing our substantive efforts in building alternative parties, doing alternative media, et cetera.
To your point about the schizophrenia and all that, look, I get all of that. Again, my point is, look, I'm as petty and trifling as anybody. So off the record, hanging out, having drinks, I will talk trash about everybody and expect that it's being done of me, and I'm cool with that. But when trying to perform an objective analysis, or when I try to think of myself in terms of in being in front of a classroom of students, for instance, or if I'm trying to be a more responsible, interlocutor, or be more responsible in my public engagement, I do think it's important to acknowledge and recognize that it's sort of the point I was making about the films. The unconscious desire for good things is important to recognize and appreciate, but I think it's also important to recognize and appreciate that those in power have themselves been studying this and manipulating this for a very long time. This is how we have a situation where 800 people worth $6 trillion can get away with that and largely live in relative safety and anonymity even, while the rest of us variously struggle to survive. So one of the ways to close that gap that those in power have been studying assiduously is how to manipulate public opinion. One of the real benefits I have to say about my PhD experience, and I don't count them as being many, is that having a moment to sit quietly for a couple of years and study what those who have built this system have said about it, and what those who were the leading funders and the elite researchers have said about our media and communicative environment, is what allows me to, it's not me saying, I'm not speculating when I'm saying there's no such thing as entertainment. I'm saying they are saying entertainment only exists to manipulate public opinion. We just need another way of doing it. We just need a less overt way of doing it to oversimplify a lot of research. I'm reacting to their claims, and similar claims have been made about electoral politics. We know people who are, again, living in various states of stress are going to need or want some sort of solution, so that in a certain extent, there's a room for a Mamdani or a Bernie or someone else to say some things that most people, everybody knows that, what is it, for 50, 60 years, 2/3 of the country wants universal health care and no war and better jobs and higher wages and all the things. Like, it's basic stuff. But it's just such a struggle to get it, whether it's that Princeton study I think you've talked about a few times. It's clear that those who rule understand this is we're going to let some room for some discussion, all within a certain context, so that it creates the schizophrenia that you're talking about, that those of us who would advocate something other than the Democratic Party we're constantly inundated with people around us with certain levels of hostility. I've gotten my own, I know you get yours, who tell you, even having a discussion with somebody left of the Democratic Party, you are doing a disservice to humanity. You are so we get all of the argument, and very little of the dominant media narrative space or anywhere else is inclusive of these discussions and these ideas. So it creates, that's, I think, by design, the schizophrenia that you're talking about. And that's why I just want to keep being defensive of these radical histories and making and efforts and saying, let's be more involved in developing these alternatives, whatever they are.
What do you think about the role of independent media? You have a podcast, I have a podcast, everybody has a podcast. I was reflecting on this today. There's a clip with Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty on Breaking Points where they're interviewing Elise Locken. It's been going very viral.
I don't really hear what you say if you are still supporting a genocide in Gaza. You have to at least cross this sort of moral threshold. What are you going to do? Because so far what we've seen, I mean, you voted for some of the aid that's been used to massacre children and innocents. You know, you have backed Israel, as far as I can tell, you know, from your voting record at almost every turn. You voted for a definition of anti-Semitism that would, you know, codify anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. You voted as a member of the House to sanction the ICC for indicting Benjamin Netanyahu, who you just admitted is a war criminal, you know, by your own words. So are you going to join Senator Angus King, Senator Bernie Sanders in saying no more aid to this country that is committing war crimes against innocent civilians?
Right now, Democrats own nothing in Washington. So
don't play powerless with me. You're a United States senator. There are things you can do.
Because it's anomalous to see a sitting Congress member sort of being challenged with real questions from someone who is not, you know, more worried about getting another invite, you know, to the getting another guest back on the show than they are like really pressing them on the inconsistency of their voting record and their values. And I thought about this a lot on Rising when we did many such interviews, right? Same show, same format. And sometimes I would get to feel like, or even after going on Piers Morgan a bunch of times, like I get to feel like, yes, there's something deeply cathartic about seeing someone with their feet held to the table. And there is the potential to create sort of a consequences for a politician in the voter booth by getting a really bad clip out of them, right? It does potentially have some real world value in terms of getting them out of their seat potentially. But realistically, as you just mentioned, there are a whole host of issues where public opinion is overwhelmingly against what politicians do and say. And there aren't electoral consequences, and it's not because they don't do occasionally embarrassing interviews where they can't answer why they don't support Medicare for all. It's because we live in a political system where you're never given the choice to vote for anybody who does support Medicare for all. And the Democratic Party is very good at making sure you never have that choice. And when the Green Party runs, they ran ads against Jill Stein and Butch Ware for the first time. They have infiltrated the Green Party, which, you know, Butch and Ajamu Baraka and, you know, Jill Stein, they'll all tell you about how much COINTELPRO is going on currently to make sure a third party never emerges. They spend millions of dollars denying them ballot access and just hanging them up in court, even though they know they're ultimately going to lose the case on the merit because they have millions of dollars to spend and the Green Party doesn't. And so then I do wonder, I ask myself, am I, in the same way that I sometimes criticize people who run as Democrats for, like Bernie, for effectively sheep herding and shoring up a system that we know is broken, making it seem like it has some legitimacy, the same way that diversity efforts make fundamentally unequal systems of capitalism seem like they're fair because there's some people of color at the top sprinkled in. Like, am I even participating, the fact that I'm even participating in this electoral space, a part of the problem? And is the fact that I'm, you know, rooting for the Superman hero that at least gives, you know, that nods to the humanity of Palestinians, part of the problem? I'm open to that. You know, I argued about it with you for 40 minutes at the top of this episode, but I am sincerely open to that. But what do we do? Because you and I are sitting here with our podcast. So what are we doing?
Look, I'm exceedingly self-critical of my involvement in any of this. I've traditionally I've been involved with all kinds of unsanctioned communication, from pirate radio to mixtapes. Like, I've always wanted to be part of some alternative communicative effort. So I don't, and so whether it's that or what I'm attempting to do on YouTube or elsewhere, I recognize some value in it. It's definitely cathartic. It's definitely, you know, a therapeutic. It's fun, even sometimes stressful and inviting of hostility. But but I am very limited in what I think is the ultimate value to it. Like I'm not overly optimistic about it, because for every great podcast that any of us create, the right is far more not only funded, but they're also more aligned with the algorithms and the ad revenue that still sort of drive all content in commercial media, never more so than in YouTube. So the media environment is still very consolidated, very manipulated, and much more pervasive and able to deliver preferred narratives than ever. That said, that's why I continue to want. That's going back even to the beginning. That's where I become more hostile to efforts to disparage any form of radical history, movement, ideas, and encouraged action today, because. Really what I think, and I've always advocated something I picked up years ago, an approach called emancipatory journalism, which just argued that really people involved with anti-colonial radical political organization need to be producing their own journalism and media for their own audiences to build their own struggles, not to create or to challenge some mass effort. I mentioned him already. I'm very much impacted by my time with Black Agenda Report and Glenn Ford and his argument that Black Agenda Report was not meant to become some mass journalistic media outlet. It was meant to be an informative think tank, journalistic media project for activists, for radical academics, or to help them organize ideas and to get on the same page and to build their movements. That's really where I see my own efforts, as critical of them as I may be. And that's sort of how I'm arguing we need to move in terms of electoral politics. That and why I've always appreciated what you and others will do. Why I always appreciate when anyone is willing to deal with people to their left. For the most part, I'm very appreciative of those efforts. That it's always easy to deal with people in our peer group, and certainly to our right, it's easy to be critical of them. But inviting people to their left is, I think, an important thing to do, to try to expand the discussion a little bit and invite people to become more radical, dare I say, in their efforts to engage any of this. So if electoral politics is seen by anyone as an effective avenue to engage, I think more of it should be on, I've been jokingly, not really jokingly, but calling myself lately a Malcolm X voter, and saying that we should approach it the way Malcolm encouraged us to engage electoral politics, where...
With a bullet?
You said that. What I was going to say is, as he said, that really the point I was going to get at is that we be the ones, and now he was talking we in terms of Black people in the United States, but however people want to conceive that we would be fine with me. That the we need to be involved in developing the candidates, the parties, and the platforms they will run on. And that way we would be more involved in assuring they be beholden to us. I understand all of it. Look, I've been in the Green Party. I've made my own efforts to run for president, or the nomination in 2008, and happily stepped back to support Cynthia and Rosa. I get how difficult it is to build parties and to engage. Yeah, I did all. Yeah, it was. Hey, I picked the right. I have all kinds of jokes about people picked the wrong mulatto and all this other kind of stuff in 2008. I got all kinds of inappropriate comments and jokes. We get for days. But but my point is, I get the difficulty. I get the difficulty of even, what I understand to be your experience of supporting. Look, I admitted 1992 was the first and last time I voted for a Democrat. And once I saw what Bill Clinton was, I was 18 at the time, or 19, somewhere around 20, somewhere around. It was my first, the first allowable election I could vote in. And I was like, okay, I'm never doing this again. So I haven't voted for a Democrat ever since. But I did say in 2016, I did say to myself, I don't know if I admitted it publicly, but I did say if Bernie gets the nomination, I'll vote for him. But I also suspected he would never get there, and sort of the point about what the party does. And I know you know very well about all this, but my point is just that I think we need to, despite all the difficulties, engage very differently and start to build, because as I know every election cycle, people will say, Jared, I basically agree with you about these, but right now we got to do this at a third. And then I would say to them, as I did in 2008, fine, I get it. You're going to vote for this Obama guy. Promise me over the next 4 to 8 years, you will spend as much time building alternatives, engaging alternative parties in politics, interviewing, if you have a platform, people in different formations, and trying so that next time you won't be telling me, Jared, we have to do, and it never happens. And I get that.
Happens.
I get it, but I don't know how else to engage, because you mentioned something about, should we take certain victories or things as wins? The win I think we should take is a reminder, and this is, that for the most part, I think most people at their baseline are good enough in terms of humanity to want certain basic things that they can't seem to get delivered for real. So when we see certain things in a movie, hear certain things from a politician, of course I think the win should be seen as that people want this. The challenge, though, is that it's not a win in terms of that actually delivering that process or that person or that party delivering that. So that's, but I really don't know. And I get it. I struggle with this all the time. I don't pretend to have, this is what we need to do and this will work. I think, but I just think, again, we need to be more welcoming of ideas we're not comfortable with, and be more welcoming of efforts that we're not encouraged to engage in.
Yeah. No, it's tough. But I hope that my sort of genuflecting on the podcast about like the behind the scenes, how I'm thinking about the like utility of this project, it doesn't come off as, I don't know. I feel like I think there's value in me being transparent about it. It was a weird thing entering this space. Like I was talking to someone recently. Oh, I think I was on a date, and someone was asking me how I got into media, and I was talking about how bizarre it felt to write my first op-ed and realizing like they're just gonna let me say anything. Like they're just gonna let me say whatever. And I was explaining why when I write, I have a very like lawyerly approach, and I feel like I gotta support with 1,000 links and references. Because it feels wrong that I'm just allowed to spew an opinion and it's not like based in anything. I feel like I have to base it in something. And I do think that makes for much stronger writing, and people should do that more than they do.
I agree.
But I similarly feel like with the podcast that I guess I have this kind of like insecurity about just sitting here and spilling my opinions, especially when I'm increasingly called upon to like be a keynote speaker at this thing and like advocate more directly than sort of just like exploring ideas and doing a push and pull. And it feels like we're to quote another potential mulatrix president, Kamala Harris. We're at an inflection point politically, broadly, but also as the left, where there are these opportunities or these fissures that are existing that are emerging within the Democratic Party because of broad disaffection, largely around the issue of Palestine. And the new IMEU study that came out, probably should have covered it in more depth on this show, but we'll maybe come back to it later, that showed the demographic breakdown of who voted for Zoran really demonstrates the role that Palestine played in people's support of Mamdani, the role that Palestine played in their rejection of Kamala Harris as a presidential candidate, and the vulnerability of the party as it goes forward if it continues with its current strategy, which I expect it will. I see Tommy Vitor and the Pod Save guys putting out clips saying that the Democratic Party has to move and change.
And I don't think Democratic candidates should take money from AIPAC or vote to fund military support for Israel anymore. Like, I really don't. In this government, absolutely not. And that especially includes, I think, the next Democratic nominee for president.
Things I want to see Democrats at least calling for is cutting off military assistance to Israel. Yep. It's a rich country, by the way. They don't need our $3 billion a year. And hands up, right? Barack Obama signed a 10-year MOU for $3.3 billion a year. So we're part of the problem here. Mm-hmm. Let's correct it. I would like to see talk about sanctioning Israeli government officials who use genocidal rhetoric or talk about ethnic cleansing openly. We should support a ceasefire resolution at the UN. We should demand that international press be allowed into the Gaza Strip to report on what's happening without an IDF minder. It's insane. The press still can't go into Gaza and cover what's happening. And I also think there has to be a total mindset change in the Democratic Party. When the war ends, we are not going back to the pre-October 7th status quo, because it's not where the party is. It's not where the world is. We're not going to shovel billions a year in military aid. We're not going to veto every effort to recognize a Palestinian state at the UN. We should not take money from AIPAC. And I will hold out hope for better political leadership in the US and in Israel. But we have to also recognize that the Biden era hug Bibi Netanyahu strategy has to be thrown in the trash can for fucking ever. Netanyahu is a bad actor. He's continuing a war for political purposes. He bombs Lebanon when he wants to. He bombs Iran when he wants to. He bombs Syria when he wants to. This is not a partner we can count on. This is not someone who is leading to calm and stability in the region, which should be a core interest.
At this point, cutting off military funding for a government that is starving 2 million people and advertising how they're ethnically cleansing the Palestinians seems like the least we can do.
Especially if we're going to head into a primary, table stakes is going to be no more military aid for Israel. So there will have to be a shift. And I do think that will mean putting far more pressure on Israel. And that's what I think Democrats want. By the way, that's what the country wants. And when you poll Israelis, they say they want a fucking ceasefire. Israelis want the hostages returned through a negotiated settlement. And by the way, that's the way in which the vast majority of hostages who were returned were able to be returned.
But I think those clips are going to be pigeonholed because the Democratic Party is not going to move and change on this issue. I know it feels like we're sort of winning ground on Gaza, especially this past week. I'm sorry. I don't think we are. I think that Israel decided on October 7th that it was doing in-game stuff. It was doing final solution stuff. They're ethnically cleansing the West Bank too now because they know this is their last bite at the apple, and they're going to make sure there's nothing left, not even a core, not even a seed, not even a stem of the proverbial apple of Palestine. And to the extent that this is a non-issue politically going forward, it's going to be because Israel did what it set out to do 76 years ago, and they will have completed the job. Now, I'm not trying to speak that into reality, knock wood, but that's just to say, don't be pacified politically because it seems like the winds are changing and you're getting, cover stories with skeletal children finally being printed in the New York Times. That's CYA. Let's cover your ass. It's not political movement. Alyssa Slotkin can sit there and be challenged by Crystal Ball, but she's not going to change a thing. And that's where I'm getting back to, what is the role of those of us who are in the crystal ball position? Yes, it seems to be there's utility in exposing the contradictions and moving public opinion. But when public opinion is there, are we participating in a kind of and I'm speaking for myself, not Crystal, who did a great job in that interview, but I feel sometimes like I'm participating in a sort of puppet show. We're going through the motions of objecting. And I joke about, let me not get into the violence aspect of this, but go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off, especially.
No. I was about to say something that was going to get me in trouble. So let me not. Let me not. Go ahead.
I think first of all, I think it's valuable, and I think it's important that anyone who does something akin to what we're doing here be honest about. I would prefer you be honest, or anyone be honest about what concerns they have in terms of the limited efficacy of their efforts, than not. I would certainly not. I certainly, some people do it as a joke, but it was some people, this is the most important podcast in the history of the world. What I'm doing, what I'm doing is going to make the change and all these kinds of things. I'm always a little bit skeptical of people making those claims and what their analysis.
Pod Save America?
Because of what I was saying earlier, that there has been a meticulously evolved. I quote it all the time, despite the contradiction of mine and what would have been his politics. But when Marshall McLuhan said, "We don't know who discovered water, but we know it was not the fish, because an all-pervasive environment is always beyond perception," I have always loved that point and his approach to how we, and the way I would apply that here is that the environment is that has been constructed outside of our awareness for the most part, is inviting of certain levels of disagreement. I mean, one of the exercises I use in my class all the time is just the basic agenda setting, model. I tell my students all the time, if you guess the number I'm thinking of between 1 and 10, I'll give you an A and you can leave class and never come back. They guess to exhaust themselves, of course, and then I say something like the number is 10 million and 4, and they all say what you said between 1 and 10, and I said that's the point. That's how that's agenda setting right there. I told you to think between 1 and 10, Democrats, Republicans. You can have all the arguments you want. You can have all the debates. You can have all the wonderful things you say, because those will be the limits of your that are imposed on our brilliance and our imagination. And so whatever I think. So whether being invited to speak somewhere, being on a mic and camera somewhere, that's why I just am personally very defensive and triggered, as they say, by criticism and condemnation of things left of the Democratic Party, again, more broadly speaking, that to whatever extent possible, we should be engaged in some form of criticism of what is being presented as the best model and best solution, because obviously it is insufficient. And whether it's the genocide in Gaza, whether it's enslavement of African people here and genocide of indigenous, or the abuses of labor over 150, 200 years of this country, the encouraged analysis and response to all of that is and ever always going to be something that doesn't challenge the underlying causes of all of those problems. So as we've evolved, and we've seen in the evolution in this country of a very sophisticated neo-colonial settler colony, it has found as many new and brilliant ways. I mean, and to their credit, mass communication research in the field of mass communication studies in this country has produced a lot of brilliant, even from the perspective of those who disagree with it, analysis in defense of how you construct a system that it gives the apparent room for debate and freedom of thought, but always leaves people coming back. So on some level, going back to my problem with American fiction, I'll end my point here by saying part of what caught me was that I fell for the apologetic for the black middle class. And in many ways, I may be falling for the apologetic for those of us who want to do left of center podcasting or public facing work, and maybe there's more righteous criticism of what I and what we are doing that is definitely of value here and worthy of consideration. But my point is that ultimately, for the most part, I don't think we should be overly self-critical in terms of what we think we can do in these spaces. And we should be more aware of the limitations and do the best we can to always push farther to the left and make room for those to our left to give us sound, reasoned, logical arguments for why we should hear them out and be criticized. And then advocate, other forms of political organization. We got to encourage constantly that people find some form of way of whether it's time, money, likes, retweets, whatever, of efforts that are organized to move people beyond where we are. So any number of grassroots efforts in defense of political prisoners, efforts in defense of obviously what's happening in Palestine. I think we should just be advocating and pushing, and then do the best we can, as I understood George Jackson to say, when revolution is not on the table in the immediate moment, those of us who want to be revolutionaries have to make space for it to occur. And I think by advocating for certain ideas and concepts to be made part of a regular conversation, that's all that we can be expected to do in overt, front-facing public work.
The bit that I wasn't going to say that I'll say now and I'll reframe is that it increasingly feels to me like everything that will work is illegal and that has been made to be illegal because it works. And I don't think we're necessarily talking about things that are morally questionable. I'm not even necessarily talking about, bang, bang stuff. But, work stop, the fact that we have sanctions and unsanctioned strikes, the way that the media has been glorifying running over folks who obstruct traffic. Conservatives love to joke about hitting people with their trucks. The increased criminal penalties for people who do nonviolent actions like tying themselves to oil pipelines or throwing soup at paintings. And that's part of what makes me feel sort of impotent as an interlocutor, is that we're all on platforms where even calling for the thing which has been made illegal can then prevent you from being able to call for anything or have any influence whatsoever. And what do? Like, you get squeezed to a point, then what, you know?
And that's why I'm saying, you know, I make reference to George Jackson, and that's why I make room for people to say you could disagree with him, just acknowledge that he exists and recognize, you know, that he was part of the history. But that's sort of the point. I just got news of some effort that's happening in London, apparently, where the British have made even showing any sign of support for some pro-Palestinian organization is illegal. So to the point that you're getting, and when I've interviewed Barrett Brown, I mean, one of the more compelling points he's made in our discussions is that Peter Thiel and the like are going to create a situation in terms of our media environment, and to McLuhan's point, where we don't even see revolution as necessary, much less whether we should do it, or whether it's right, or whether we would win, or whether what form would be successful, or that it won't, that we're going to be put into a point where we won't even see it as being necessary. And that to me is terrifying, but realistic, an idea that I can think of in terms of these spaces and what we're trying to push and resist against. But that's why, again, I keep saying the solutions are going to come here. We can't have the open and honest discussions that I think we would need to be able to. That's why we have to advocate in these spaces that people go into political organizations where all the real answers will actually ever come. This public work is meant to just inspire. I mean, George Jackson even argued that part of what media needs to do, and alternative media needs to do, is inspire and just give room for the idea of revolution. So that we can
like the Superman movie.
So what poor George was unfortunately assassinated before he could understand completely, and I do have the benefit of 50 years of hindsight, is that the media environment would recognize that and would adjust itself to that. And that's why they study counterinsurgency efforts, and that's why they employ them in our media environment, and that's why there is such an incestuous relationship from the beginning, whether it's the internet as military technology or the military involved in our popular culture, as we were talking about earlier. That's why. As J. Rue said, the legendary J. Rue said, the same chip that powers my Sega powers nuclear bombs. The same chip that powers nuclear bombs powers my Sega. So we're playing with the trinkets, and they're, doing something else.
And Elon was, first of all, very much the dog videos, very much the psyop of making us love those little animatronic dogs that dance and wear the little outfits, but that they're going to have a gun on their back, murdering your children in 2 seconds. But also the same media that cast Elon Musk as Lex Luthor was also in media. Star Trek will never live this down. God bless the memory of Gene Roddenberry. When they had Elon on an episode, I think it was of Discovery.
Oh, wow.
As like a cool cameo back in the time when libs still loved Elon, and he was like a good guy. So yeah, I take your point of being wary of the media. Dr. Ball, here I was thinking that we were going to have to fill out this episode with a conversation about the Sydney Sweeney good genes controversy.
Oh wow.
But we're at the 2-hour mark, so maybe I shouldn't have even brought it up.
I'm not even. What do I even know what this controversy is? I don't even know.
It's for the best. Well, I'm tempted to be like, okay, Armand, play the tape, cue the ad.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Sydney Sweeney has.
Oh wow.
Do you know who Sydney Sweeney is?
I do, because wait a minute. No, wait a minute. I do know.
She's a blonde actress.
Yeah.
She was in the first season of White Lotus. She's been in stuff. I don't know.
But wasn't she? Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Wasn't she what?
Oh no, that's not her. I was thinking she was in one of. Isn't she one that was in one of these? Yeah, she was in the reality winner show movie. I did see that.
Yes,
so I did see her in the which itself in many ways
interesting casting.
quite a interesting casting, but also quite a counterinsurgent way of delivering that story. But I'm not aware of this. Oh yeah, I would. There were two reality winner films, this one and another one that came out somewhat around the same time, and they're both very interesting and somewhat even good in certain ways, but also damaging in terms of how we understand the transfer of, particularly around the role of the Intercept in turning over her, breaking the journalistic code and turning over her what is it? Her releases to the government.
The
documents. Yeah, But anyway.
The controversy is that she's known mostly for roles where she plays this sort of a blonde bombshell, and she is in this jean advertisement for American Eagle, the brand, in which she repeatedly says, "I have good genes."
Okay, Sydney Sweeney has great genes. Okay, very sexually provocative ad. Yep, got you. And she's got good genes.
And there's a few of them. I want to say there's one where she explicitly talks about having blue eyes. There's like a blue eye, blue jeans sort of a thing. So people are upset about this. I don't know that many people actually are, if this is sort of like a media generated controversy to make like the woke seem irrational, but I don't think it's a stretch to think it is questionable in this media environment to do an ad with a very Aryan presenting woman talking about how she has good genes. If there's a world where there were a lot of people, well, let me say less. What do you think?
White supremacy in this country and in my upbringing. So I see everything primarily through the lens of race, and I admit the shortcomings in that, but I do. So I have no problem watching that ad and especially when she says, when the male voice comes in and says, Sydney Sweeney has good genes, and she says, "See what I did there?" In the one I saw, it's so I probably would have heard it that way even if they had not done that. That if she just says I have good genes or something is made, I would have heard it that way. And I don't think, again, given the context and the history and how a lot of these ads and work and media work and product are meticulously put together. And we should give them more credit for that, even if we don't like the end product. There's a definite effort here. That it feels very. I think you said Aryan. It comes across very Aryan. It's very waspy.
You don't get to do the wink and not, like the ad copy doesn't make sense if it's not a pun about genetics, right? So like, let's just skip past all the bad faith defenses of this that say she's just talking about her blue genes. Now I think if this were I think the people who don't have any problem with this whatsoever, I want to be really clear. There's literal genocides happening in the world. There's a lot bigger problems. Nobody really cares about this, right? Like nobody really cares. That being said, I would ask anybody who says this ad is a nothing burger completely to imagine if this ad would ever take place with someone who was very beautiful, but who wasn't white. Like, can you imagine a world where one of those cute South Asian girls from Bridgerton, for instance, was doing this exact same ad? The one that just went viral for being stunning at Wimbledon. Like, can you imagine her in this ad?
No, and I would even think that the success of the colonial imposition over these years would have even non-white people, the world's majority, looking at an ad with that woman doing that exact thing and saying, even unconsciously, the point about genetics doesn't work if it's not in the context of whiteness. It's not even to say that we agree that whites have superior genes, but to say that the pun, as you pointed out, doesn't work. And there's no legacy of Asian or African or Latin American world dominance in the context of racialization where them having the good genes would work as a pun when you're obviously targeting largely white consumers. So it can only be that way. And again, I'm the guy that doesn't accept any room for it's just this or just an ad or just entertainment. It's all carrying certain messaging. And the parallel to your point about something happening worse in the world, I don't think it's a leap that we go from commercials like this that have been embedded in messaging since we were babies. We grow up with variations of that message that lead us to even, again, unconsciously sanction what's happening in Gaza or the West Bank or Palestine in general, and to accept Superman and other neoliberal responses as acceptable. Like, I think that's all part of it. And part of it does start with this idea that the West and WASPs and Aryans have superior genetics and therefore superior analyses and superior cultures and civilizations. And therefore, at the end of the day, we may feel bad on some level for the Palestinians, but not bad enough that we're actually going to do something different than at best voting for Westmore next time. I don't know, whoever they're going to run. I don't
Please
know.
don't. No, I mean, I will say, I think Norman Finkelstein's point about, really clarifying the language around sort of Jewish supremacy as the motivating force that sort of legitimizes the project of Israel, like that without that, none of this makes sense, is an important one. And in a world where we're sort of reckoning with that, to do an ad like that, like it's like a weird, there's like a weird way that like all of the white supremacist Aryan stuff is being on the same team as like the pro-Zionist stuff, when like this is the historic antagonism that got us all horrified, like got the term genocide invented in the first place. Yeah.
So I admit, to admit some of the silliness that I've watched over the years, I used to watch 30 Rock a lot. And I like Tracy Morgan there was a scene where they're reviewing some commercial and for some security, home security, and the commercial's portrayal of the criminal breaking into the home was a black man. And Tracy Morgan goes into this whole joke about, old racism is back. Now, we're back to putting black people into the roles of criminals on TV. The Obama effect is over. We're back to old style racism. That's sort of how I feel watching this. Like we're reverting back to traditional baseline waspish Aryan dominance, superior genetics. Racism.
Yeah,
we're past the DEI moment. We're not doing colors of Benetton
never
anymore.
went away. There's an argument that it's refreshing for it to be out in the open. I had a conversation. I don't know if I should get it. I had a conversation recently with a casual acquaintance where he is not white nor black. And he was saying, he was like complimenting, he couldn't believe how old I was. And he was ostensibly complimenting me and saying, black people are so lucky, about how you age. And,
black don't crack.
Great. Yeah. And he was saying like, oh yeah, like I feel so bad for white people, blah, blah, blah. He was going up. Some drinks had been had. And then he goes, the one thing, I don't like about my people, my people have, big like our noses are bad. Everybody has a bad thing. Our people, we have big noses. Your people, your hair is awful. Like you have to deal with that, those tight curls. He didn't use the word curls, but but like you age well, and we have this and that. And he thought he was being, I think, sort of egalitarian. Like he thought he was like giving me a compliment, saying everybody has their pros and cons, and sort of what was so surprising to me is he fully expected me to buy into his sort of like, I won't say it was like a white supremacist understanding of racial politics, because he did acknowledge that white skin wasn't exactly the lottery in terms of aging, right? But the kind of casualness, like the confidence with which he said that to me, and thought that him like offering up his own criticism of his own people was going to be pacifying to me when I just felt sorry for him. I was like, I don't feel that way about my hair, and I'm sad for you that you feel that way about your nose. But like the sort of casualness of that exchange, I've been thinking about it for weeks because it says something to me about how like that stuff never went away. Like there were no white people in the making of this conversation, right? But like the expectation that we all see each other, we all see ourselves on some kind of like hierarchy of a desirability that fundamentally orients us as like below an ideal that is not Black and is not what this guy was and is not, you know, as a Black person, I've often felt that as a racial group, we're one of the few that does not buy into sort of white beauty standards on whole. I'm not saying that we don't have our issues and there isn't colorism and like hair politics and all of that stuff. But like generally, even if you internalize some of that stuff, you know, your pride does not allow you to admit anything out. You would never say out loud that you had some insecurity on the basis of like colorism or something like that. Like we don't respect it, right? Like we think people like that are like coonish and embarrassing. Do you just like, I see you like kind of looking to the side. Do you think?
Well, only because because every time I in general, I agree with what you're saying. I think what I'm doing is being almost forced to recall the exceptions to what is probably right that you're saying is the rule.
And of course there are exceptions. I live in a world where I very much feel colorism and hair politics in my day. Like it's definitely real.
But that's why
I can't imagine being in a conversation with a Black person in a pool being like, yeah, I hate Black hair. That's insane.
In general, like for the overwhelming most part, you're absolutely right. And I'm only being drawn to certain exceptions. But I think, you know, you're right. And I think that anyway, the way I'm interpreting what I'm hearing you say, not knowing exactly who you're talking about or the person, you know, or their background, is that, again, the colonial experience, to the point, doesn't require anymore. It's like a twist of the four trees fall and you're not there. Does it make us like you don't need white people present for white supremacy to exist? Yeah. You don't need, you know, the all of the communicative powers that white supremacy and colonialism have cross borders and all forms of boundaries. So it makes sense. I do tend to think that in general, Black people are, to your point, much more resistant, at least in public conversation, to some of that. And I can't imagine a situation where, well, unfortunately, I can't imagine the exceptions to it. That's what I keep getting stuck in. But you're right. I think in general, you're right. Let me just stop there because
the reason I bring it up is to say, I think that some people don't have an issue with this ad because they agree.
Oh, wow.
They agree with it. Do you know what I mean? And not just white people.
Oh, no, that's definitely the case.
They agree that Sydney Sweeney, and I'm almost like not offended by the ad because it's so silly. Like, no disrespect to Sydney Sweeney, but I don't compare myself to him. Comparing myself to him that looks like Sydney Sweeney is like comparing myself to a tree. Might be a pretty tree, but it has nothing to do with me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't even think of white people like that. Like, I don't think about white girls like that. I'm not even
right.
Like, there goes a nice bird. Like, it's not me. That has nothing to do with me.
Well, I didn't want to look. The version and I'll leave this up to your editing decisions, and I'll just risk this. But when I watched the version I just watched, where she's saying the jeans make her butt look good, I was like,
oh yeah.
I was like, that's a very white girl thing to say. I was like, that's mighty white of you, Sydney. If that's what but I don't want to be, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just saying, God bless, right? God bless, salute, all of that. But you not. Yeah,
there's
no
many
threat.
There's
no many kinds of beauty.
And the thing is, there's many
somebody for everybody.
There's somebody for everybody is right. Everybody, there's somebody. And that's a beautiful thing. And if American Eagle wanted to, like, they're enjoying this, like they did this on purpose, right? Like, they're not stupid. But if they did actually, if this were like the woke era still and they were concerned about negative backlash, all they would have to do is release a series of ads with different women.
We all have good
different
genes.
racial backgrounds that are, God forbid someone even with like a different body or differently abled or something. That would be like real 2012 stuff. I don't think we're there. I don't think we're back to
we're not back to that level of advanced thinking. That's exactly right. They would be, because I'm sure part of the defense would be, we didn't mean white women or white people. We meant Sydney specifically has good genes, pun intended, all of that. And then
or
to your point,
beautiful people, and then they just trot out other beautiful people, which is problematic also. But never mind, it's an ad. We can accept that ads use beautiful people.
Right.
But it would be so easy, and I'm interested to see kind of where this goes from here, because like it's just such an easy thing to do. Throw Beyonce in there. She's blonde.
That's funny.
You know what I mean?
Funny.
Put a little American Requiem underneath it, and we have a whole Americana fricassee.
There you go. She could do her horse riding thing and all of that Again, to the basic point, I am team, as they say, overdo it, overthink it. As they say, I'm always bristle when people say you're thinking too much. I'm always like, no, why would you ever say that? That's never a criticism. But it's so I absolutely believe that there was an attempt here to make a point about the sanctity of whiteness, and we should see it that way. Even if we want to say, look, it's not that deep or not that powerful or upsetting in the end, we should at least recognize, is always my argument, the intent. And the intent there is pretty clear.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Ball, as someone who has pretty good genes to another person with pretty good genes, where can people find more of you and your content? And I Mix What I Like on the internet and beyond.
No, I appreciate it. I Mix What I Like everywhere. I'm easy to find. And I appreciate the invitation. This has been fun. I've had a really good time.
A blast, very cathartic, unexpectedly so. I look forward to chatting again sometime soon in the future. Thanks to all of you for subscribing or listening to this episode of Bad Faith Podcast. If you would like to subscribe to Bad Faith, you can do so at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast and listen to the 90-minute plus episode that we just did on Monday with the great Whitney Webb, who gave a really detailed breakdown of all that's going on in Epstein world, including some content related to today's conversation when we got into a little bit to the kind of constructed West Coast, East Coast beef in the music industry's role in that, and the Epstein tie to that as well. So check that out if you haven't listened to that episode already. Thanks for hanging with us today. As always, take care of yourselves and remember to keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.